Thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for your lecture and for your presentation. Very informative and I think this is one thing that I have appreciated about you. I've known a little bit about you over the years. You have clarity, something that distinguishes what you do, and it was a very clear presentation. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, first and foremost, a lot of people here that know you as a Bible teacher, as a preacher. How did you end up in this debate?
Yes, it's nothing that I planned on, for sure. And in fact, it's very unpleasant. And you hurt people that you care about when you take a stand like this. And you get a lot of resistance and ugly attack, which is not something that you really look for or ask for. But I've always been burdened about the church's impact on society. I've always felt that we're supposed to have a positive impact on society. Jesus said, "You're the salt of the earth, the light of the world." And therefore that the church should try to bring about good in the society. That's why we had the horrors of slavery in America, but it was ultimately Christians who were able to turn the tide with that. Christians are in the front of the pro-life movement in America for that very reason. About 11 years ago, God began to lay on my heart that this was the great issue that we had to address, that homosexual activism had become the principal threat to freedom of religion, speech, and conscience, and in many ways would affect the entire generation. It was the great moral crisis we had to deal with it. And that's how God laid it on my heart, that I needed to add my voice to try to make a positive difference.
How did you enter into the debate? Was it completely foreign to you, or did you know a little bit about it, or how did that?
Well, it was in 2004 that I first really began to be burdened by it, when I saw things that were happening in the city where I lived. We had moved there the previous year. And of course, what the Bible said about these issues is very simple. And I've studied all the literature on the other side. I've debated people on the other side. And there's really no debate. The Bible is very clearly against homosexual practice. So I was aware of that. And for many years, when I would preach on sexual purity, I was speaking to heterosexuals about our issues and our problems. So the unique aspects of homosexual activism, that was really something new to me. So what I began to do is really pray for God's heart. I began to listen to as many gay people as I could, try to sit and have a meal. If I was flying on the plane and met someone and I realized they were gay, I'd immediately ask them to tell me their story, because I wanted to understand their lives better. I wanted to see things from their eyes. I began to read constantly people who said they were gay Christians, people who were gay activists and leading the battle. I read their stories so I could really be sympathetic to their side, understand it, to the point that sometimes I'd have to put the book down, go alone in the room and get on my knees and pray, and I would cry and cry. I said, "God, I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't want to hurt anybody. I want to do what's right." So I would study. I'd look at the scientific literature of people born gay, the social issues, all these other things, and then began to raise my voice in our community. Began to reach out. At a gay pride event, we would just lovingly reach out, nothing hostile, nothing confrontational, but just try to share God's love with people. I began to address things with our local government and leaders, and then began to write on it and speak about it more and more until the point that I became a voice in this area.
And what, you mentioned a little bit about some of the response you gave. You gave us some examples from your social media accounts, and you mentioned also of how you ended up, or inevitably you'd end up hurting people when you take a stand. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit?
Sure. Let's say you're a gay couple that's here tonight, and when I say that it's not really marriage, that hurts you. That makes you feel like you're somehow less than human, or that you didn't choose to have these desires. This is how you found yourself. Now you're in a meaningful relationship with someone. Who am I to tell you that you can't have the same benefits in marriage that I have, or that you don't have the right to bring children into the world? You've always wanted to have children and you're not attracted to the opposite sex, so who am I to speak against that? So I understand, Arnie, when you say these things that people are hurt, or when I say, look, according to the Bible, homosexual practice is forbidden, people get hurt by that. So you do the best you can to speak with love. You do the best you can to build relationships and to try to bridge that, to say, okay, I know you're offended and upset, but can we talk? And I'm sorry I hurt you, but I have to hold to these things. So that's inevitable. Unfortunately, many Christians in their zeal to stand for what's right can be almost nasty, almost angry about this. And sometimes when the homosexual community responds to me, and not everyone, but when many people respond to me in the ugliest ways, I mean, I only read things that I could read here, but I mean, wishing for my death with details of how they want me to die and all these ugly things and full of profanity, I remind myself that behind that anger, maybe there's pain. And that's why I really wanted to have a debate so that we could address things with differences in a civil way to say, hey, we're still neighbors here. We still live in the same world, or here you live on the same islands. How can we be friends in the midst of our differences? That's what we have to seek to model. But there's so much emotion. There's so many raw feelings. It's often very hard.
The first question actually that came in relates to that, and it's a question about how should churches or church communities, and maybe individual Christians as well, treat members of their communities who come out as gay, or at least are struggling to come to terms with that.
Let's say first, if someone is struggling, they absolutely have to get involved with that person's life like nothing else. They need to be a friend, no matter how many ups and downs that person has. I don't relate to this personally because it's not my background, but I've read enough, I've talked to enough people to know it's a very intense struggle. What if someone's raised in a Christian home and they know what the Bible says about this? And now they're 13, 14 years old and they realize all my friends are attracted to the opposite sex. I'm attracted to the same sex. They think, okay, it's just going to go away. I'm going to outgrow this. Now they're 15, 16. The desires are getting deep. They start to think, does this mean I can never have a relationship for the rest of my life? Does God hate me? Does the church hate me? And they come out and tell their parents, I'm gay. And that's the only way they know how to say it. They don't know how to say, I'm struggling with same-sex attractions. They say, I'm gay. And the parents, instead of saying, hey, we love you. That's all right. We all struggle with one thing or another. You're our child. We love you just the same. We're here for you. Let's get through this together. No, sometimes the parents are angry and they even say, get out of my house, just when that kid needs the parents more than anything. So maybe you have a friend for 10 years and he secretly comes to you and says, listen, I'm struggling with homosexuality. I can't deny it anymore. I'm married to a woman. I'm not attracted to her. I struggle all the time. And you say, oh, get away from me. How can we do that? That's when we have to be the best friend that person ever had and say, I'm here for you. Let's get through this. And no matter what's happening, God loves you the same. Jesus died for you the same. That's one thing. If someone says, I don't care what you say, you're wrong. I am a Christian and I'm in a gay relationship with my boyfriend or my girlfriend. We're active sexually, we live together, and you can't tell me it's wrong, and I'm coming to your church. Well, that's when you reach out to the people, you show them the word, you patiently address it, but if they refuse to hear you, then you have to dismiss them from your congregation. Because Paul is very clear, whatever the sin is, if a man left his wife and is now living with another woman, and those two are coming to your church, it's the exact same thing. You deal with them in love, you call them to repentance. If they refuse to repent, you have to dismiss them from the congregation. But we have to make a tremendous distinction between the person who says, I'm out, I'm proud, I'm gay, I'm active, and I'm following Jesus, so they are very deceived. You have to make a distinction between that person and the one who says, I want to follow the Lord, but I'm really struggling and I need help. They're very different categories.
What, if a young person came up to you like that, or maybe, as you mentioned, a friend of yours who's married to a woman, let's say it's a man who's married to a woman, what sort of hope do you have to offer that person? Abundant
hope, wonderful hope. The message that we bring is a message of life and hope and salvation and wholeness. I know people who have completely changed, literally, people close to me. They went from homosexual to heterosexual. With God's power, all things are possible. And in fact, often with godly professional counseling, just talking to people, they can get to the root of things. Sometimes you can trace back where these things began. I know it's not the case with all people, but so many have talked to me about being abused at a certain age and the sexual confusion that came after that, and then the changes that came. And when they got to the root of that, they were changed. I know others who are married to the opposite sex, and they have had their same-sex attractions greatly diminish, and they're very happily married. They struggle sometimes. The spouse understands that. But it's just like a man who's married to a woman, he's tempted to look at other women. The wife understands that, and they now cultivate holiness so he can grow in these areas. And then I know others that have not had their desires changed. They prayed, they went for counseling, and they're still attracted to the same sex, but they say no to it, and they're following Jesus, and their lives are full and blessed. One pastor in England says it like this: he's still attracted to the same sex, but he says no to it, and he's living a holy life as a single man. And if God doesn't change his desires, he's happy to be single. And he said, it's not any harder for me than anyone else, because Jesus requires everything from all of us, and Jesus is enough for all of us. So on a spiritual level, we're filled with hope, and I know so many. They'll come up to me after I speak with a big smile and say, I used to be living a homosexual lifestyle, and I'm so free, I'm so happy, and they'll tell me, keep doing what you're doing. That's their testimony, so they can speak to that better than I can.
Okay. That kind of throws up a couple of questions. First, do you think people are born gay? And second, do you think you can, well, I guess you already answered that. Can people change their orientation? And does it matter in sort of the ethical discussion?
Yes. Are people born gay? I would have no problem with that if that was the case. In other words, as human beings, we believe sinful human beings, we're all born fallen one way or another. You know, you realize as you're raising your children that you don't have to teach them to say no. You don't have to teach your children to be selfish. So we just, all of us by nature are flawed and fallen in certain ways. So theologically, I have no problem with the concept, but there is no reputable scientific evidence that anyone is born gay. Even if you go to the most activist psychological websites, pro-gay activist psychological websites in America or England, I mean the major organizations, they say we don't really know. We don't know the causes. It could be partly biological, it could be partly upbringing, we don't know. The best we can tell is that some people by their nature are more predisposed to end up gay. In other words, if you put that person in a certain environment, they have a higher chance of becoming homosexual. But being predisposed does not mean being predestined. The fact that you can correlate certain things doesn't mean you found the cause. So, in fact, there is no reputable scientific evidence that anyone is born gay. And what we discover more and more is sexual fluidity, especially with women. That a woman may be married to a man, they live together for years as husband and wife, they have children, and then she's attracted to another woman and goes off with that woman, and then ends up going back with a man. And it wasn't that she discovered she was bisexual. At just one phase in her life, she thought she was attracted to men, and another phase to women. As far as people changing, from what we could tell, these things are so deeply ingrained. In other words, it could be influences when a child was 2 or 3. It could be a sexual encounter the child had at the age of 10. So now when they start to develop at 12, 13, 14, that's who they are. So in their mind, I was born this way. In their mind, I've always been this way. And from what we can see, in most cases, it's very, very deeply rooted. It's not something easily changed. When gay activists will say, look, if you are a righty, you can't become a lefty. Well, you could work at it, and you could get better at it, but it's still not normal for you. So in most cases, very deeply rooted, very difficult to change. That's why we have to have so much compassion. On an ethical level, in terms of society, it only matters if we try to redefine marriage or affect the children and their upbringing. On another level, now it's just a biblical issue. Is it sinful or not? But on the ethical level, if men have relations with men and women have relations with women, as long as they don't break laws, that's between them and God. Once they now want to redefine marriage based on their romantic attractions and sexual desires, once they now want things taught in the schools to the children, once they now are going to deprive a child of a mother and father, then it becomes ethical.
So in a way, you could say that it's really kind of a battle of ideas, of different interpretative frameworks, kind of, where What's happening more and more is that children and just society accepts that if you feel a certain way, that must mean you are gay.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier about how gay activism started out as very family, against the traditional family. The family was seen as oppressive and primitive, especially towards women, oppressive towards women, and something that should be rooted out of society. But that changed. Can you talk a little bit about that change and how that has affected?
Yeah, there were strategic changes, and there were changes based on genuine feelings. The strategic change was this, and it's documented from the late 1980s. Gay activists have this in writing, that the way they were doing things was failing. The kind of confrontational, we're here, we're queer, get used to it, that was considered to be counterproductive and was driving people away. So they said we need to change our strategy so that we are just more accepted by society as a whole. So that was strategic. The other thing is just that gay couples said, hey, we love each other, we care for each other, why can't we have the same rights and benefits as everyone else? And a mentality that we have a lot in America is basically everything revolves around me and my feelings. We even have Christian theology like that in America, which basically says, this is who I am, this is how I feel, and God is here to please me. That's the way Americans think. It's the opposite. This is who God is, this is how he feels, and we are here to please him. But if it's all about me, then if I have certain desires, society has to accept that. And if I believe I'm a woman trapped in a man's body, then you have to accept my reality. And it goes as far as you can imagine. We now have controversy in America over skin color issues. There's a white woman who said that I identify as black. Why can't she be recognized as black? And on it goes. We even have the argument that gay is the new black. And because Americans had such a bad history with slavery and segregation, so we don't want to repeat that now, so we're being told homosexuality is the same thing. Can I prove to you that gay is not the new black? Yes, can I show you that? I will take less than 10 seconds. My sister over here, could you please stand? Please tell us, when did you come out as black? Okay, you can sit down. You see the difference, all right? You have to come out as gay. You have to say, this is who I am. You have to demonstrate it with words or have a behavior associated with it. It's completely different than being born a certain way. That cannot be changed. So, again, there's so much confusion in the society over this, and the gay activists have their little slogans, and many times we don't know the right way to respond.
All right. Okay. Thinking a little bit about parenting. That's something you talked a lot about, and kind of that was almost the most important thing that you talked about, according to yourself. A lot of people would say, you seem to talk a lot about fathers and mothers, and you have a very traditional way of thinking about fatherhood and motherhood, but people are incredibly diverse. You have very feminine men and very masculine women. Why should we even have a sort of a binary approach to parenthood? Isn't it enough if they receive love and support and security?
Right. Well, the first thing is, how are children brought into the world? We still have the primitive binary, you need one man and you need one woman. Everyone here, if you don't even know who your mother and father are, I guarantee you did have a mother and you did have a father. That's the only way we can be here. So I didn't make up the binary. This is the way it exists. And in point of fact, in almost every relationship with a man and woman, you do see distinctives. There is no substitute for a woman who carries a baby, all right? I know parents can adopt and love their kids. I'm not denying that for a moment. But I, as a man, still cannot relate to what my wife went through. carrying our children in her womb, giving birth to them, nursing those children, the way she feels towards them, the way she understands them. Now, of course, they're grown women with children of their own. It's unique. It's different. The same thing with the role of the father. So, again, marriage is based on the generalities and the norm. Just like you have a speed limit with driving, maybe you can drive really fast and don't need it, but the speed limit is for everyone, and therefore you do it. The laws are based on the norm and not the exception. So the fact that you may have a masculine woman and a feminine man, you don't now redefine marriage based on that. Otherwise, you have thousands of different marriage definitions. Not only so, if it's just a matter of love, then how about communal love? How about a whole group raising a child and things like that? Does the government therefore have to recognize that? Ultimately, people can form what unions and relationships they want, but the government has only reason for being involved. As I said, marriage conveys benefits on the government, namely producing children for the next generation and joining those children to a mother and father. And that, generally speaking, is far and away the best social environment for the long-term health of a society.
All right. What about adoption? Isn't it much worse for a child to be left in an impoverished nation somewhere than to be adopted by a gay couple, for example? So shouldn't gay couples get the right to adopt?
Yeah, the question would be, why do we ask about the worst case scenario? You could come up with 1,000 different things. It would be better for a child dying of starvation, neglected in an orphanage, to be raised by a rich alcoholic father, just one man raising that child, at least they would get care. Is that the ideal? So to say, isn't this better than this, is meaningless. When a child is given up for adoption, maybe here's a mother, she knows she can't raise the child, she's a drug addict, she knows she needs help, she gives that child up for adoption. There's the hope and the expectation that that child will find their way into a home with a mother and father. She wasn't thinking, okay, maybe 2 men will end up raising my little girl. What we do know is that there are heterosexual couples on long lists waiting to adopt children. And in America now, we have increasing problem with adopting children from overseas because of all of the sex trade, all of the craziness of child pornography. So the government is very concerned about this. So we need to address those abuses. And there are long lines of heterosexuals waiting to address. The question is, what's best for the child? What's best is a home with a mom and dad. So that's what we need to strive for, the best for the child. I know it can sound very hurtful to gay couples that really love their kids, and I'm sure there are fine kids raised by gay couples. But as I said to a very sweet lesbian woman in my city, I was having a dialogue with her. I said, doesn't it bother you, though, that your kids don't have a dad? Isn't there something ultimately missing? As they grow up, as they get married, let's say they're all heterosexual, they get married, they'll realize what their kids have that they never had.
Yeah. You quoted in the beginning of your lecture someone who said that marriage is a basic human right, if I remember it correctly. How do you answer that? Is marriage a human right? And how do you balance, if it is a right, I don't know, depending on what you say, and how do you balance that against the rights of children to their parents? Or
we shouldn't think of marriage so much as a human right, or we should think of it as the most fundamental human institution.
Okay.
The most fundamental element of society is marriage and then family. Ultimately, when we look at marriage, if anyone has rights, we need to think about the rights of the children and put that first.
Okay. So you wouldn't say that marriage is a human right?
I wouldn't say marriage is a human right in terms of human beings most fundamentally can marry, and every society recognizes that and accepts it. But for example, for the government to recognize it and convey benefits on it, that's something a government has to decide to do. The government can say you can marry and do what you want. We don't recognize it. We don't do anything with it. Families can be whatever they want to be. But I don't believe that I said that marriage is the most fundamental human right or quoted someone to that effect. I can go through the notes to see the exact quote.
Yeah, but I think you quoted someone that you disagreed with. ultimately. But one thing that I thought about that I was reminded of now that you mention it is there is another sort of a third way in, should it be heterosexual or homosexual marriage? There's a third way of the sort of the libertarian way, where there are some people that say, well, why should government even be in marriage? Shouldn't that just be up to individuals and their communities, their churches, whatever? What do you say to that?
Well, the institution of marriage brings tremendous stability to the society. Studies have been done over many centuries looking at various societies in the ancient world, and it was discovered that the societies that flourished were the ones that had solid, monogamous marriages. Those were the ones that were most stable for society. So again, there's no reason for the government to get out of this, for the government to cease to recognize it, because it is the most foundational, stable element of the society. So to just react because gay activists raise pressure and objections, again, less than 2% of the population, according to the most broad surveys in America and the United Kingdom, to destroy the whole institution and all of the benefits it brings to society is incredibly self-centered. If we can't have it, no one can have it. That makes no sense at all. So I understand the libertarian argument. Some even raise it in America, but it's a good arrangement for the government to encourage healthy marriages and for healthy marriages to help the society. Okay.
There is a question here, and I actually received a text personally from someone who's listening in Denmark who couldn't text that number, or a Facebook message or something like that. In regards to adoption, you said we shouldn't look at the worst case scenarios. One question is, well, aren't adoptions often solutions to the worst case scenario? And also, if it's wrong to bring up worst case scenarios in terms of adoption, haven't you been bringing up worst case scenarios in terms of gender and sexuality and marriage in your presentation? Mm-hmm. If it's invalid in arguing for adoption for gay couples, why is it valid for you to bring up worst case scenarios?
I appreciate the question. Actually, my whole argument is what's best. That's all. What's best? So what's best for a child that's being adopted is to have a mother and father, naturally. It's not best to deprive a child of either one by choice. It's not best to put a child in an environment where they will never see how a husband and wife and a man and woman, a mother and father interact, which is going to be the norm for the vast majority of children, because the vast majority will still be heterosexual. So it's not best to deprive that child of that. That's very, very simple. When I look at the other cases, I'm not looking at worst case scenarios. I'm just saying this is what's already happening. I'm not looking at worst case scenarios that this could happen where someone is fined or goes to jail because they can't in good conscience participate. No, it's happening all the time across America. I'm not looking at worst case scenarios about what's in our schools. It's in the schools. The government just basically passed laws now imposing transgender ordinances on all of America. Of course, these things are being resisted. So it's just like the worst case scenario with abortion is not a dead baby. That's just what happens. So what I'm just telling you is this is what happens. I've said many times, I'm sure there are gay couples that love each other or that love the children they're raising. It's just not the best on every level. And it guarantees bringing with it all these other problems. So not worst case, just this is what happens.
How would you respond to, say there's a gay couple in here or a gay individual who in their mind has both the sort of the principal objection to what you are saying and proposing being discriminatory, but also the sort of the emotional and historical background of gay people and non-heterosexual people being oppressed throughout history. Mm-hmm. And for example, the AIDS crisis, of the response, the public response to that might be incredibly painful for someone to remember back to that period and to other periods in history where oppression and even violence against gay people was just accepted and even seen as something good. How do you respond to a person like that saying what you're saying is actually not just discriminatory based on principle and philosophy and so on, but is part of this ancient discrimination and oppression of people who are like me, who are gay?
Yeah. Of course, it's a powerful question because we're talking about people's lives. We're not just talking about an issue, we're talking about people's lives. First, on the discrimination issue, there are two responses. Marriage has always had one meaning. It's always, on any level, even in polygamous marriages, throughout history, it's always been required a male and a female. So when you want to now change the fundamental definition of marriage, it's not discriminatory to say, well, this is what marriage is. For example, if I say 1 + 1 is 2, that's math. That's not spelling. If I say C-A-T spells cat, that's spelling, that's not math, right? So it's not discriminatory to say marriage is the union of a man and a woman. And if you want to change that, you're now changing something fundamental. But I would take it one step further. There are many gay activists who oppose polygamy. Isn't that discriminatory? There are gay activists who oppose grown adults having a consensual relationship. Is that discriminatory? So unless it's abusive, like kidnapping a child or something like that, that all consensual relationships should be accepted, then you're being discriminatory. So unless you want to apply that to everyone that has any barrier anywhere, you have to drop the discriminatory word. We're simply saying, this is the meaning of marriage, don't try to redefine it. As far as history, in America, when the AIDS crisis happened, the natural response, especially of the church, was to say this is judgment from God. Because what we saw was the worst side of homosexual practice. You have to understand the gay pride marches going down the streets were the worst side of it. That it was not the nice couple, lesbian couple raising their children and living a quiet life. It was naked men walking down the streets. It was all kinds of promiscuity. And we know, it's not a mystery, that gay men are more promiscuous than heterosexual men. When you have a man and woman relationship, it tends to balance out the relationship. When you have man plus man, men being more into sex often and things like that man plus man, it only inflames things. I mean, this is not a secret. That's why the gay male relationships are much more open and fluid to be with others. But when the church saw this, the reaction was, this must be divine judgment. And here there were people in terrible pain, in terrible fear. You have this epidemic sweeping through the community. Your best friends are dying. And instead of the church being there saying, hey, we love you, we care for you, there is an answer in Jesus. Your sins can be forgiven. There is new life in Jesus. Instead, what they heard from the church is, you dirty sinners, you deserve this. And because of that, many that really could have experienced God's love instead were pushed away. Listen, I regret the fact that in countries like Iran, if you're found out, you just be beaten to death on the street and that's fine. Or you could be hung and that's fine. Thankfully, that's not our culture, that's not our practice. So we still have to make a distinction between redefining marriage based on someone's sexual desires and romantic attractions. That's all it is. Redefining marriage based on that versus hanging someone because they're homosexual. And in point of fact, there is no connection between the two. Emotionally, you may feel the same, but you cannot accept all of society to alter its very foundational institutions and definitions and structures to accommodate your sexual desires and romantic attractions. So there is a happy medium between what they do in Iran and hanging someone who's homosexual to just saying all relationships are fine as long as you love each other.
All right. I have one final question before we can open up the floor and people can ask a question if they want to. I'm interested in gay activism and specifically how it happens, but also maybe international relations, because I was talking to a friend of mine who comes from Africa, who comes from Zambia, one of the poorest countries in Africa. And he told me about how a lot of the aid money that they get there comes with strings attached, where you have wealthy countries like the States or Sweden and other places saying, you can get this money, but only if you enact gay-friendly laws. Laws that don't necessarily reflect the local custom and traditions and values. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm ashamed of it. It's something that we do very openly in America. Vice President Joe Biden has recently said he put at least 4 other government leaders in other countries under real pressure about these things. I've spoken to friends in other countries who've told me about the leaders in their country that they know personally, about getting calls from America, even from the President of the United States. The people of Uganda were told, unless you change your laws, we will stop sending you aid. And the people of Uganda said, then stop sending us aid. You're not going to change our culture. Now look, there were things in the Uganda law that were extreme. You know, if repeated homosexual acts could carry the death penalty. And there are American Christians who said you have every right to have your laws, but please modify some of these things. But for America to tell the Faroe Islands how to live, that's why I came in here saying I'm doing anything but that. I'm giving you a warning, making appeal as an American. To tell Africa, this is how you have to live, to have the arrogance to tell other cultures. I know we think it's humanitarian, we think it's fair, but these cultures are under great pressure. Uganda not only passed these laws about homosexuality, but they also passed laws about female modesty, that a woman could not have a shirt that was too low cut or a dress that was too short. They couldn't have music videos on TV that had too much sexual content. That's a very different society. And we don't have the right to go in and tell them you have to do this, but we put money into the schools. We equip gay activists. I was in Singapore, which is one of the wealthiest nations, city-states in the world, and one of the university professors was telling me about Yale University working with their university, the lead university in the country, sending in gay activist professors, getting them hired to change the culture. Businessmen were telling me that they're under pressure from companies like Microsoft, Google, whichever specific ones they were, I'm not sure, that unless they change their policies towards homosexuality, then they can't do business with these companies or receive income from these companies. So it's very ugly. It's strong-armed. It's offensive. It really makes us in America claim higher moral ground when we do not have the right. We can all condemn ISIS. We can all condemn certain groups, but America, with the mess that our families are in, with so many single-parent homes, with so much drug abuse, with incredible violence that we have in our culture and all of the shootings, we export pornography, the world's leader in exporting pornography around the world. We have no right to tell another country in general, this is how you have to treat marriage and this is what you have to do with teaching children about homosexuality. That's arrogant and it's hypocritical, and I'm ashamed of it.
So would it be fair to say that the support for gay marriage and gay rights and normalization of the gay lifestyle is as much a top-down phenomena as it is a bottom-up one?
Yes, certainly. And if things were taught differently in the culture, young people would grow up with different attitudes about this. Yes, so in many ways it is. We've become more sympathetic to the needs and struggles of those who identify as LGBT. That's positive. We don't just look at them in these ugly terms. We become more sensitive to the struggles. But no question, especially the influence of the media. And let me just say this. Initially, I was told that there were 2 people that were going to debate me, 2 parliamentarians who were pushing for this bill. And I said, wonderful, let's do it. And remember, I came all the way over from America to do this debate, only to find out pretty much last minute that everyone has dropped out and no one is willing to do it. That's why we turned it into a lecture with questions. So I'm glad to have this opportunity. But one argument was, well, we don't need someone from America to lecture us here. Of course, I'm coming to appeal to say, learn from our mistakes. Oh, but hang on. I put on the TV the other day, last night, just to see what's on TV, and I saw a lot of American programs. It looks like our media is making an influence here, TV and movies. And I would challenge the members of parliament and gay activist organizations here in Faroe Islands to be completely open and forthcoming and to answer honestly, have you received any input from gay activist organizations in America or elsewhere in Europe? Any at all? Have you received any coaching? Have you received any funding? Have you received any material? I can almost guarantee you that gay activism in the Faroe Islands is not just happening on its own. So I find it absolutely absurd to say, well, we won't debate someone from America when our media is flooding in here, impacting your kids as well, when our social media is flooding in here, when our mentality is flooding in here. You know, in Ireland, the vote there was heavily funded by gay activists in America. And the strategies were put in place years in advance to get certain goals. So why not? We put everything on the table. You can ask me anything. I have no secrets about any of the stuff we're doing. No secrets about our finances. It's all open and very available. Let the gay activists here, the members of parliament, be just as open and say we have no association whatsoever, no money, no coaching, no materials, nothing whatsoever from America or other parts of Europe. This is all of our own. It won't happen.
All right. Okay. I'll switch over to Faroese. Hvis je anker har noen spurning som jeg vil spørre Dr. Brown, så er de velkomne å hånden opp og sette han. Hvis det er anker som ikke er så sikker ut i enska, så blir det vel til å sette han av førskolen, så kan jeg omsette han bare. All right. Any questions? Or did Dr. Brown cover everything perfectly?
Thank you so much for coming here for an English lecture and for listening. I hope things were clear and intelligible.
There's one in the back, yeah.
By the way, you know the right way to do questions? If someone has a question in the back, the next one has to be the front row, so they go back and forth like that.
Well, first of all, Dr. Brown, very welcome to the Faroes. I couldn't believe my eyes when I was driving down the main street yesterday and saw your face. And I thought, what an extraordinary likeness to the fellow I'm reading avidly every week. So
thank you, sir.
It was wonderful to hear the radio announce that you would be here tonight. A hearty welcome from me, certainly. Now, if only 2% of the population tends to be gay, we don't know, but some people argue there are many more. But I think that statistics bear out there are only about 2%. Why do you think the consensus is moving in the wrong, in our view, the wrong direction? Who is driving this gay activist movement? To what extent is it purely partisan, political? And how do the fronts move in this battle? What is the overriding, the ulterior motive? To what extent are they trying to change society? Are they trying to disrupt our family pattern? Are they trying to undo our Christian culture, heritage, tradition?
Yeah.
Please.
Yeah, thank you for the warm welcome and for the important questions. For many years we heard that 1 in 10 was gay. But most gay activists knew that that was not an accurate figure, but it was a convenient figure. It seemed like a lot. The surveys have been done for years now, even by gay organizations, and the percentage ends up being under 2% or 2.5% very, very consistently. Now, there's a lot more experimentation, especially young ladies experimenting, and it's in the media a lot, girls kissing girls. But in terms of those who identify as exclusively homosexual, very small percentage. Now, here's what's fascinating. A poll was done in the US about 4 years ago, and they asked Americans what percentage of the population is gay. And Americans estimated 25%. Not 2%, not 10%, 25%. Young people estimated more than 30%. Where did they get that idea? The bombardment through the media. So what's driving this? Several things. First, for gay activists, this is about their lives. This is them. They don't go to a gay meeting once a week. They're gay. So for them, this is a matter of their whole lives. It's a matter of being accepted, etc. And the sexual revolution of the 1960s really opened the door wide to this. Heterosexual divorce for no reason at all, no fault divorce, just if we don't get along, that began to bring deterioration to the meaning of marriage. So it's all happening at a time when the meaning of marriage is getting weaker and weaker. For example, from 1960 until the year 2000 in America, it's not just that the divorce rate doubled, but children being born out of wedlock went up 6 times. And people living together out of wedlock went up 7 times. So that today in America, if you are a woman having a baby for the first time, so not your second or third or fourth child, but a woman having a baby for the first time, at least half of all of those babies in America being born to women for the first time are outside of wedlock. So we have massive deterioration of the meaning of marriage. You will not find any country where marriage is strong and healthy and divorce is fairly rare. You will not find any country where same-sex activists are making this type of headway. That's why in Scandinavia, with so many couples living together out of wedlock, with less and less people getting married, that you have the open door for the redefining of marriage. So for gay activists, this is their life. This is a life and death situation. The sexual revolution and the deterioration of marriage has opened the door wider. You have many gays who are very creative in different ways, very gifted in different ways, and have had a disproportionate influence in the media. We know for sure that many of the screenwriters and many of producers and others, that there's a higher percentage in Hollywood of those who are gay than in the rest of the country. Did you see the movies here, the X-Men? Is that known in Faroe Islands? Some? Okay. I began to read about this, and I was immediately struck that the X-Men, that was an image for homosexuals. I mean, I just saw part of one of the movies, and I said, it's so obvious. So I wrote about it, and as I researched, I found out one of the main producers was gay, one of the main actors was gay, key script writers were gay. When I wrote about it, gay publications made fun of me. They said, all of us know this. You just discovered it. We all know this. This is not a secret. So there's a very disproportionate emphasis and presence in the media. That's driving things. And then to the extent that society has taken hold of this and said, this is the new civil rights movement. Gay is the new black. That is driving it as well, especially in America, because we want to stand with the victims. We want to stand with those who are being discriminated against. And then lastly, big business is driving this. They just feel it's a good business decision. They have lots of homosexual employees, many of them fine employees, many of them leaders in their organization, and it just seems to work well to accommodate them more, and they kind of take for granted all the religious people and others who would be offended by this. What's the ultimate goal? Well, it all depends. Just like heterosexuals are not all the same, homosexuals are not all the same. There are plenty that want to undermine our values and beliefs, that feel that our religious beliefs are primitive and destructive and harmful, and they want to undermine those completely. There are others who say, no, we just want the same rights as everyone else in marriage. And there are others who have a completely destructive view of marriage. So different organizations, different mindsets. Ultimately, what they would all agree on is they want an equal place at the table. If you can marry and have children, we want to be able to marry and have children. If you get tax benefits, we want tax benefits, with no real vision of the larger implications in society. But some are very, very radical. The thing is, your neighbor or friend is probably not one of those radical activists. If you have a gay neighbor or friend, they probably just want to live their lives. They want to be accepted and live a quiet life, just like you want to be accepted and live a quiet life. And that's all most of them are asking for. It's the activists who can drive things further. Another question. It can also be theological. My lecture was not theological, but it can be. Okay, over here.
I have a question about civil unions. 25 years ago, that was a big debate, at least here in Scandinavia. The homosexuals wanted civil rights to live together as married couples, but not marriage. And the churches were very much opposed to it back then. And I see from the debate today that the opponents of same-sex marriage are saying that we don't want to redefine marriage, but we're willing to make some other arrangements. What is your view on this?
Yeah, it's a terrible mistake. It's a step in the wrong direction. Let me address this from a few angles. What we've seen thus far, that the gay activists who said, all we want is civil unions, we don't want to redefine marriage, this is a few years back, once you agree to civil unions, then they say that's not enough. We've watched this happen. That's not enough. You're still bigoted. You're still discriminating against us. It's still not equal. The society doesn't look at us the same way. So it's only a temporary step, and then you keep pushing. And then once again, I ask the question, why is the government obligated to recognize every loving relationship? Why is there an obligation on the government? If you have 3 women who've come together, that throuple, like that picture I showed you, is the government obligated to recognize that? No, it has no obligation to do so. Should people be able to make up wills and contracts if 2 gay men, one wants the other to visit him in the hospital or have him in his will? They should be able to do whatever they want and in that respect, but the government does not have to legally recognize the relationship as a civil union. So what's happening in the churches? Christians have gotten worn out. This is not our main battle. This is not our main focus. And yet it's something that keeps knocking at the door. So sometimes we just lose heart and say, okay, we'll give in here. I'm just telling you, you give in here, I'll tell you what's coming next. And it's going to be harder to say no to same-sex marriages if you said yes to same-sex civil unions. That's why you have to draw the line there. But also, Christians, many of them have departed from biblical foundations, and they're more driven by emotions and feelings. They don't want people to say they're intolerant. Look, I did a radio interview that'll air in a few days, and the interviewer said that some of the people said, well, why should they do a debate with a right-wing extremist like me? And I'm listed as a hate leader in America, so you get slandered. You get these groups that really publish ugly things about you. Now, I expect it. For me, it's for the gospel, and it doesn't bother me. I feel bad for the people, and I know that the opposition I'm receiving is because I'm a follower of Jesus. But your average pastor, you're leading the church, you don't want all this controversy. You don't want articles in the newspaper calling you hate-filled and bigoted. You don't want the people your children in the school, people they find out they go to your church and you're opposing this, and the kids are under pressure. So the church is little by little caving in, and we are offending God, and we are offending our society. We're not helping anyone when we do it. So we look someone in the eye and say, I love you, I care about you, but I don't agree with same-sex civil unions. Why? Because we love our neighbor as ourselves, and love is based on truth, not just based on emotions and feelings. So we must hold our ground there, and then we must go back to the Word as Christians and understand what we believe. Now someone says, but this is a state issue, it's not a Christian issue. Well, does that mean that Christians can't have an opinion? Does that mean that only secular people can have an opinion? Does that mean that the only ones who can vote on marriage are the ones who are not religious? That's absolute absurdity. We all bring our viewpoints, maybe based on your atheism, maybe based on your Christianity, maybe based on something else. You form your viewpoint, and then you advocate for it, and you vote on it. That's what we do in a democracy, and that's all we're asking people to do here. But to open the door to civil unions has no constructive purpose, is a compromise that only leads to the next compromise.
Det är ganska gott att nämna akkurat här att han tar om civil unions så är det här som till det samma som skrasat perla av förskolan. Any other questions?
this is your opportunity.
Yep.
Let me just mention also, please connect with me online. If you're on the internet, connect with me. We are very, very active. I write normally 3 or 4 or 5 new articles every week. I have a live radio broadcast 2 hours every day. It would air here in the Faroe Islands in the mid-evening, and you could listen to it online for free. We put up new videos, and many of them deal with these issues. We cover other ground as well. So we have thousands of hours of free resources, and I have been really blessed to meet people here who say, I listen to your radio show almost every day. I watch you on YouTube, and it's really helped my family. So my website is askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org. How many here follow me on Facebook, just out of curiosity? Okay, a good number of you. We are very active there, so say hello to me on Facebook, get your other friends on there, and we'll post some pictures from this tonight. Yes, ma'am.
I'm actually Irish, so because you mentioned Ireland. Mine, it's more a reflection, because you brought up the issue of freedom of religion and freedom of speech.
Mm-hmm.
And personally, I find what sometimes the discussion in the Faroes is actually very, very unconstructive and very negative. We've had a campaign on Facebook and other places, where people were wearing the slogan, Ja til kærleika, which means yes to love. And the strong implication was that anyone that wasn't saying yes to gay marriage wasn't saying no to love. And it's a very, very dangerous, I think, message to be given society. And people are proudly wearing that. And the question is, what are they saying to those who, for reasons of conscience or reasons of biology or reasons of philosophy, can't say yes to gay marriage? The implication is that they're not loving people, that they're saying no to love. We also have the problem here in the Faroes. We have had 2 polls, and the headlines are across the newspapers. 68% of the Faroe Islands is for gay marriage. You were not told how many people were involved in the poll unless you specifically ask, and I went and asked LGBT. And then you discover there were 1,000 people in the poll. We had the same problem in Ireland. 1,000 people do not represent 49,000 people. And I think the media has not been objective. They have a very biased approach very often. And also the politicians. I think the fact that no politician turned up tonight to meet this, to be an active part of this discussion, is a disgrace.
Yes.
And I say that to every single, I have no vote in the Faroes, so I have no agenda. But I say that to every single politician in the Faroe Islands. I think it's a disgrace if we're talking about a democratic country. And I've seen this in Ireland. We had a campaign. There was not one representative in the government who took part to look at the traditional marriage. We had a completely one-sided media, and we had Amnesty International pushing a very strong agenda. We have the same thing in the Faroe Islands. Somebody brought up the question of human rights. Marriage is a human right. In the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they're talking about the traditional family. There was an attempt made again this year to redefine marriage at the level of the United Nations. It was turned down, and the traditional family was reaffirmed. We need to know that. We need to challenge, I think, people. And I would like to know, have you had any dialogue with Amnesty? How do you approach human rights organizations? I also think we need to emphasize that there are atheists and there are gay people who are against gay marriage.
Yes.
And how do you dialogue with these people? How do you address this blockage in our media and in our political life?
Yeah. Thanks for all the points and observations. Just to respond very briefly. First, a poll of 1,000 out of 49,000 is actually not a low number if you do a proper representative sampling. It also depends on what questions you ask and how you ask them. You can almost guarantee you can get certain results by asking a certain way. So you could probably get the opposite results if you phrase the questions differently. And then again, look at this. The media pushes one thing. Then they poll the people, and the people have a certain viewpoint. What does it prove? It proves the media is very influential. And in Ireland, despite the massive campaign, the other problems in Ireland were the Catholic Church had lost its moral voice because of the sex scandals in the church. So it had less authority to speak, and then one side completely outspends the other side. It becomes very, very difficult, and still there was opposition to it. In France, one of the main leaders in the massive rallies there against redefining marriage is a gay comedian who says, look, men are men and women are women, and we shouldn't redefine things. As far as Amnesty International, they have not been a major voice in America over this. Many other organizations have. In big business, our biggest companies, almost all of our biggest companies in America are very aggressive gay activists. But the Human Rights Campaign is the world's largest gay activist organization, and they put me on their list of exporting hate to the nations. So now I'll have to add Faroe Islands to my list. I've confronted them. I actually had a debate with one of their representatives years ago. I have regularly written about their hypocrisy and the false things that they put out and the hatred that they spread. But they will normally never dialogue with you. The Southern Poverty Law Center became famous in America for fighting the Ku Klux Klan, these white racist organizations and neo-Nazi organizations. And then some years back, they turned very hostile on conservative Christians. So they put me on a list along with neo-Nazis and black supremacists and everything. It was very funny. I mean, I was personally blessed to be put on that list. But when I challenged them, and when I wrote to them openly, and when I said, come on my radio show, let's dialogue, let's interact, they don't even respond. I have a national radio show, they won't even respond. You know who they put on that list a few months ago? Dr. Ben Carson, one of our presidential candidates. The most respected children's neurosurgeon in the world. That raised the level of consciousness of so many things and raised the esteem of Johns Hopkins University. Presidential candidate, they put him on the same list, the same hate list that I was on. And then others brought it to attention, so they had to apologize and remove it. And actually, if you click on their website, you'll find my name, but nothing when you click on it. So I think they've pulled my stuff also. But they basically have a certain mentality of they don't need to talk to us. They've marginalized us as right-wing fanatics and extremists, and that's what they're going to sell to everyone. And unfortunately, a lot of people, especially in this generation where people don't think, they just tweet out little messages. So you go back to the first thing, love is love. That's what our president tweeted out. The Supreme Court made major decisions. Love is love. Love wins. So I just ask people. They say, why are you against love? I said, I'm not against love. I'm against redefining marriage. That's the first thing. And the second thing is love is love. So I'll say to them, what about two gay brothers? Or what about this brother and sister in Germany? They've gone to court to ask to allow to be married. No, that's wrong. I said, well, why is that wrong? If love is love. And of course, either they say then everything is fine, or they have to admit they don't have an answer. I gave this lecture with some other notes in it at a college campus. I added some things tonight, took some things out, but I gave it at a college campus in America. And we talk about the slippery slope, and people say there is no slippery slope. We're already well down the slope. So a number of students challenged me afterwards. It's all secular, not using the Bible at all. They challenged me afterwards. And when I asked them, okay, if love is love, then what about this, what about that? Their end argument was, there's nothing wrong with the slippery slope. Instead of denying it, their answer was, well, it's fine. The government needs to recognize every loving relationship, no matter who it is, no matter what number, because love is love. And that shows the complete absurdity of it. My expectation is that gay activists will overplay their hand. They will go too far. Gay activists gain great sympathy because many homosexual men and women were bullied, beat up, hurt growing up, and we're sympathetic to that. Kids heard what the church taught and went out and killed themselves. We're very sympathetic to that. That's why we speak the truth in love. Well, now the ones who used to be bullied, they have become the bullies. Those who came out of the closet are trying to put us in the closet. And we're already starting to push back against that in America. And when they keep going further, it used to just be gay rights. That was not enough. Gay and lesbian rights, not enough. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, not enough. Gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, not enough. The list keeps getting longer. At a certain point, someone says, this is crazy. When we have a male athlete who is now the woman of the year, something is terribly wrong. And on it goes. So I believe the tide will turn, but it may have to crash first before the tide will turn.
I think we have time for maybe one or possibly two questions.
Okay, I'll try to answer more briefly. All the way in the back, and then all the way in the front, just as I said.
Okay, we'll take the back first and then the front.
All right.
Ja, jeg spør først gang, Ernest, og så omsider.
Okay, I'll translate after.
Vidant er at det er sånn land, særlig Vesterhavnen, som har hver lover er brøtt der til Hjúnaband og samme Kina. Så her ser du, Michael Brown, at du hever en suksess, og det som du gjør, vi til dømes at land attertaker lover, eller opplevde noen suksess. Hvis jeg herfer som du fører, eller man kan kalle det herfer. Hitt er så hver sørst du og i sin her, som du arbeider ved om 2015-20 år.
Okay. The question is that there are a number of countries that are changing their laws. Do you, in your fight or your crusade against gay marriage and all the related issues, do you see any success? Do you see any change for the better? And also, how do you see the future, in terms of your work in 15, 20 years?
Yeah. On the one hand, this is not my personal battle. There are many other aspects of ministry that I do. I've gone to India every year for 23 straight years and maybe mentioned this once or twice in all my trips to India. We have graduates from our ministry school that we raise up and send out. That's how I found out about the Faroe Islands, through students coming from the Faroe Islands to our school in the States years ago, because otherwise I'm sorry to say I didn't know about the Faroe Islands. My apologies. So we have grads, for example, going into the Muslim world in very, very dangerous situations now to help those in need and to minister to the refugees. So we have many, many different things we do in ministry. I'm a Jewish follower of Jesus. I'm always engaged in reaching other Jewish people with the message of Jesus. And this is ultimately not my battle. All I can do is do what's right and speak and act accordingly. On the one hand, in America, we've seen negative setback after negative setback. Many of these things we saw coming, many of them I wrote about years ago and said, this is what's coming. The positive in America is that the church is starting to wake up. They didn't listen to us for years and years, or most did not. Little by little, people are realizing how far things have gone and calling for turning back. But 2 years ago, I was asked to go to Peru. And in Peru, I was asked to address this issue before leaders of Congress and university chancellors. And there was a strong pro-family movement in Peru, which is a Catholic country with strong family roots. One of the men in Congress was pushing for a bill to redefine marriage and introduce these things. And thankfully, the whole thing got stopped. There was enough of a public opposition that the whole thing was stopped. Of course, there are other countries in Africa and other countries. I don't agree with all of the laws and standards, but they have said no to the pressure. There's a very, very large rally that's supposed to take place in Italy later this month that could have hundreds of thousands or 1 million people, some massive rallies in France. So even though we've seen things go liberal more and more in these countries, there's a massive outcry from the nation. So there's definitely progress in certain places, for sure. Where are things going? If the church does not wake up in America and these other countries, it's only going to get worse. And either Jesus will return first, or we'll really have a social collapse. For example, on average, you need 2.1 children born to every woman during her childbearing years to sustain society, on average. If you dip below that, as the years go on, there is not an adequate support system for the older generation. So right now, in many countries across the world, Japan being one of the worst, there is less and less interest in having children. You know many countries in Europe, you have no children or you have one child and that's enough. The one-child policy for years in China, for other reasons there. What you're having now, Russia's having problems, Greece, Spain, it goes on and on. I don't know what the percentages here are in the Faroe Islands, but without adequate reproduction of children for the next generation, the societies will fail. It may take 50 or 100 years, but the society will ultimately collapse. So this is another issue. This has nothing to do with homosexuality. This is just another issue of lack of esteem of the importance of marriage and family. So either one of three scenarios: the church awakens and begins to bring a cultural change, as often happens with revival. Scenario one. Scenario two, it takes a whole generation or two to really hit bottom before we begin to reconstruct and rebuild the right way. Or three, everything heads in the wrong direction and Jesus comes first. What I'm expecting is that there's going to be a positive turn in my lifetime. I personally live with tremendous expectation and excitement, believing that the church will wake up and that we'll even see a moral and cultural revolution in America based on the gospel. That's my expectation. My latest book is called Outlasting the Gay Revolution, where homosexual activism is really going and how to turn the tide. And in that book, I demonstrate how gay activism has within itself the seeds of self-destruction, but that if we live by God's principles, marriage, family, gender distinctions, things like that, then we will be the ones that outlast the gay revolution. All right, last question, right here in the front. No pressure. I just hope it's an unbelievably, incredibly good last question.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I would like to ask on the issue here in the Faroe Islands. We're maybe heading for the next step with the laws maybe changing in the Faroe Islands. The first step was that that sexual orientation was mentioned in one of the laws as not discriminatory towards sexual orientation. But this next step is same-sex marriage with some maybe clauses which are on the law. But I would like to ask maybe what can we expect of consequences to our society if we follow these laws, if we change these laws in the Faroe Islands?
Yes. So it would be wrong to think that if you change these laws, that lightning will strike from heaven and the Faroe Islands will become like Sodom and Gomorrah and destroyed by God. That would be wrong thinking. And sometimes gay activists say, well, everything changed, what's the big deal? A lot of things take 20 or 30 or 40 years before you see the negative fruit. For example, in America, when we made no-fault divorce the rule of the land, when we said that you don't have to have adultery or abuse, if you just don't get along, you can divorce, it took a generation to see how destructive this was on the children. That we thought we were doing this in the best interest of the children so the husband and wife would not be fighting all the time, and we realized that it was terribly destructive for the children, but it was studies done 25 years later that could discover that. So some things will take time, but if it goes in this direction, initially you will have laws that protect the churches and things like that. Those laws will begin to be attacked because for the fact that the church does not have to recognize this marriage or participate, then the church is allowed to be bigoted. So there will be opposition to that. Individuals, just in the secular workplace, will experience opposition. For example, if you're a photographer and someone comes in, two men, and says, we'd like you to photograph our wedding. And you say, no, I'm a Christian, I can't do that. I can't pose the two men and say, okay, give him a little kiss right now. And I can't do that as a Christian. That you could be fined or taken to court for discrimination based on sexual orientation. Let's say that the school is going to teach a lesson for your 6-year-old child, and they're going to talk about different families. And some families have a mommy and a daddy, Some families just have a mommy, some have a daddy, some have two mommies, some have two daddies. You go to the school and say, I'm sorry, if you're going to teach on that to my child, I want to take my child out. They say, but it's the law. It's perfectly legal. You don't have the right to remove your child. These are all things that have happened, of course, in America. So freedom of speech will get attacked. Freedom of religion and conscience will get attacked. It could be you experience what I experienced on Facebook, that I post something, nothing hateful, nothing ugly, just a simple statement about marriage and family and why it needs to be man and woman. And a lot of gay participants and their friends on Facebook protest, and Facebook shuts you down. They've done that to me now 4 times. Twice over gay issues, maybe 5 times, twice over Islamic issues. And so it's either 4 or 5 times. They've ultimately apologized to me and said it was a mistake, it shouldn't have happened. But here right now we have about 310,000 followers on Facebook. We communicate with people, suddenly you get shut down, you can't do that. That's a terrible disservice. So one of my friends just had his account closed. It was called The Bible Against Homosexuality. And because it got complaints from gay activists and their friends, Facebook shut it down. You can have a Facebook page mocking Jesus, mocking the Bible, mocking Christianity, and that's fine. But this violates standards. So freedom of speech and communication gets attacked even on social media. And then you have the implications of bringing more children into these relationships and the impact on a generation that's raised without knowing a mother, without knowing a father. You'll lead next to the war on gender in general. There is a school for little children in one city in California. So they had boys' rooms and girls' rooms. They're all being removed. All bathrooms now are gender neutral. This is for kids as young as 5 years old. So it's that type of social insanity. In Sweden, they just introduced a new pronoun. They have he and she, but they introduced a new one, hen. So it's not male, it's not female. So you don't have to identify people as male and female. In Sweden, they are encouraging people. The educational system is taught to downplay gender distinctions. People are being encouraged to pick boys' names to use for girls and girls' names to use for boys. So I gave an illustration today. I just mentioned this a little bit in my talk today, earlier in the day. I said if you go to Sweden and you look at the largest toy catalog, you'll find that they have broken down gender distinctions because of complaints from transgenders. So you'll see that they have boys playing with princess dolls and girls playing with guns, toy guns in the catalog. So one of my hosts here said that's what we have now in Faroe Islands. We have the same thing in our catalog. So it's already here in the beginning. You can expect it to increase radically. Again, those who came out of the closet want to put us in the closet. So what I urge you to do is, number 1, give yourselves to prayer for your nation. Number 2, ask God to give you a heart of love for those who identify as LGBT. Number 3, inform all of the friends that you can, and then all of you call your representatives and say, please do not redefine marriage. And if you do, we will make sure you're not reelected because this is a major issue to us. And if you won't represent our concerns, we can't vote for you. Just do your job in that respect. So get educated as much as you can. Spread materials. Again, for those that speak English or read English, I have resources on this all the time. You like something I write, share it with others, post it with others, and get the information out. And this video, as soon as possible, from the lecture and the interview and Q&A will be made available, and hopefully that can be a resource. And then if the country goes the wrong way, you ask God for forgiveness, and you say, okay, that's the wrong decision, but we're going to keep working to see it turned the other way. Let another government reverse it. And in the meantime, we'll be all the more active in reaching out and standing up for what's right in our own communities. There will be opposition, there will be a price to pay, but it's well worth it. And your children and grandchildren will thank you for standing and doing what's right.
All right. I have to change the rules a little bit. I saw a hand in the back there.
That's fine.
You might have been told that no members of parliament have shown up, but there is one, but he might be on your side, though.
I was only told that none would debate me. Listen, I'm sorry, but I don't know the faces of the parliament members, so if you are here, I'm glad you're here. And let me say this, if you came here and disagree with me, thank you for listening so respectfully. Thank you for, if you had a problem with anything I said, just listening quietly and respectfully. I do appreciate that. If you're all in agreement with me, I understand that. Wonderful. And thank you all for coming on a Saturday night. I appreciate that and filling this building. But if you're here, you disagreed with me, thank you for being respectful. I admire that and appreciate it. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, I am a member of the parliament, and I would like to thank you very much for coming and for your words here tonight. Now I will switch over to Faroese.
Yes.
Ja, jeg får takke til som er fyrrøyget der. Og det som jeg liker bare hjertet å si, det at vi som kan man si, arbeider for at verja hjúnaband, det ikke at de aller fleste som inne her takker undervidt og det bare gitt fra meg, fra begynner så jo. Og jeg føler det her, og i lagtingen at det skal til å være samt om etter Jim Jog det litt. Og tog skulle det være nok så være vi tog som vi sier alt det, og særlig kanskje ikke fokusere så rævlig på at ikke være som opponerer. Det kan være at det var sånne årsøker og så videre. Det er mange som ivast og ikke tårer og så videre. Så at vi da også husker om det, og hver i synnerlig røyner at gjøre det som man kan for at avvarske det. Det kan vi gjøre på mange måter, bare vi bia, men også vi at avvarske livene og lagten på en sånn måte. Det var bare en sånn tanke som vi har, og jeg føler at dette ser alvarsamt, og dette øyla tatt. Så det var bare en sånn little V-machine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. That was more of a comment than a question. A politician, you know. No, just kidding. Just encouraging those who are against the law to stand firm and keep their heads up and do what they can to influence things. But yeah, okay, so we have reached the end.
Let me just say this.
Oh, yeah.
Please pray for leaders like this that are standing, because they come under a lot of pressure. And we do believe that God can really turn things around. And one thing we see more and more is we see more and more homosexual men and women being attracted to Jesus, coming to faith. And I've been telling the churches for years, get ready, because people are going to come, a man is going to come into your church service wearing a dress, carrying a Bible. And you say, what do? Invite him out for lunch, spend time with him, help him to really know the Lord and find wholeness. So God is moving, but those standing politically, those standing spiritually come under a lot of pressure, and it can get very ugly. So we pray that God gives them courage and strength, and God will always bless that. So thank you, sir.
Yeah, it isn't often that honor and pleasure coincide, but it has been an honor and a pleasure to have you here, speaking on my behalf and most likely on all of our behalves. I must say that you're the nicest right-wing extremist I've ever met.
Thank you, sir.
And you gave a very good talk, and so thank you very much.